Hi, I'm Dale Wells. Welcome to Lesson 12 in our 13-week study of Moses face to face with God. Israel has come to the verge of the Promised Land, and Moses passes the baton to Joshua in our lesson today. This is a Heritage Bible Masterclass study. The Heritage Bible Masterclass is a non-denominational group of senior adults who love the Lord and His Word. We meet at the Heritage Palms Country Club, south of Fred Waring, east of Jefferson Street in Indio, California, every Sunday morning at 10:15. We'd love to have you join us. Just let them know at the gate that you're there for the Bible study, and the guard will let you right in. Feel free to comment as you watch this video, and if you find these videos helpful, help me out by hitting the like button. Also, if you'll subscribe, you'll be notified whenever I post new material to this channel. Our scripture text today comes from Deuteronomy 31, verses 1 to 13. Let's listen to it as we read it together.
Chapter 31. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, You shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. So Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel. Then Moses commanded them, At the end of every 7 years, in the year for canceling debts, during the festival of tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, you shall read this law before them in their hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the foreigners residing in your towns, so they can listen and learn to fear the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of this law. Their children who do not know this law must hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess.
As is our custom, I've written 10 questions to think about as you read the text. Let's take a look at them and my answers anyway. What did Moses say to Israel in chapter 31, verses 1 and 2? Well, the text says, Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I'm now 120 years old, and I'm no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, You shall not cross the Jordan. Moses' farewell address combines reference to his own personal limitations and references to God's divine faithfulness. He prepares Israel for a transition in leadership while emphasizing the continuity of God's divine presence and his purpose. When he says, I'm no longer able to lead you, the phrase is literally, I'm no longer able to go out and come in. It uses military terminology, indicating that Moses is no longer able to continue active battlefield leadership. It's not a reference to general physical incapacity. In fact, this is a phrase that appears frequently in military contexts, describing active campaign leadership, suggesting that Moses' primary concern here involves his ability to command on the battlefield, rather than a reference to general administrative capacity. He acknowledges his physical limitation, and that demonstrates mature leadership that recognizes the appropriate timing for succession rather than clinging to position beyond the time you can serve effectively. When Moses says, "The Lord has said to me, you will not cross the Jordan," it's a reference to his failure at Meribah back in Numbers chapter 20. While it maintains focus on the divine decision rather than his personal failure. The Hebrew construction emphasizes God's authority in determining leadership boundaries. It avoids a detailed explanation that might undermine Israel's confidence in divine justice or Moses' continuing effectiveness during the transition to Joshua. The theological significance emerges through Moses' combination of his personal limitation with divine continuity. His farewell emphasizes that divine purposes transcend individual leaders, creating foundation for confidence in Israel's future under their new leadership. This approach demonstrates effective succession planning that maintains institutional confidence while honestly addressing leadership change. Moses' farewell demonstrates that effective succession planning requires honest acknowledgement of personal limitations combined with confident affirmation of divine continuity, creating smooth transition that maintains institutional confidence while enabling new leadership to emerge. Moses spent 40 years in Pharaoh's court, 40 years as a shepherd, and 40 years as the leader of a nation. How did each phase contribute to making him God's servant leader? Each 40-year phase of Moses' life provided essential preparation for his ultimate calling as God's servant leader, demonstrating divine providence that shapes character through diverse experiences and seemingly unrelated circumstances. The structured progression reveals how God uses all of life's stages, including apparent setbacks and career changes, to develop leadership capacity for future service. The Egyptian court phase provided Moses with administrative expertise, political awareness, and cultural sophistication that would be necessary for confronting Pharaoh and for organizing a slave population into a functioning nation. His education included Egyptian literacy, mathematics, architecture, and military strategy that proved essential for his leadership in the wilderness. The Hebrew text of Exodus suggests that Moses retained his Egyptian education while developing his Hebrew identity, creating a bicultural competence that would be crucial for mediating between Israel and the surrounding nations. The Midianite shepherd phase developed practical skills, patience, and intimate knowledge of wilderness geography that proved indispensable during 40 years of nomadic leadership. Shepherding required vigilance, decision-making under pressure, protection against predators, and guidance of stubborn animals. All these skills would be transferred to leading Israel. His marriage to Zipporah in Exodus 2:21 created a family connection with the Midianite tribal leaders who later provided crucial assistance to him, according to Numbers 10, verses 29 to 32. The Israelite leadership phase combined administrative skills from Egypt with practical wisdom from shepherding, creating a unique qualification for managing a large population under harsh conditions. Moses applied Egyptian organizational principles, like organizing the people under various heads of leadership, while maintaining a shepherd-like personal care for the individuals. His bicultural experience enabled effective communication with both Hebrew slaves and Egyptian officials. The theological principle involves divine sovereignty that orchestrates life's experiences, including apparent failures and setbacks, to develop character and competence for future service. Moses' flight from Egypt appeared to end his leadership potential, yet God used this exile for essential preparation that could not have occurred within Pharaoh's court. God uses all of our life phases, educational, professional, relational, even crisis periods, to develop our character, our skills, and our wisdom necessary for future service opportunities. Career changes, geographical moves, family responsibilities, personal struggles all provide preparation for unexpected ministry opportunities that require precisely the combination of experience gained through apparent detours. God's sovereignty enables him to use every phase of life, including apparent setbacks and career disappointments, to develop the precise combination of skills, character, and wisdom necessary for future service opportunities that could not have been anticipated during the preparation period. So, who did Moses say was going to go across the Jordan before Israel? Verses 3 and 4 is a great text. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said, and the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the king of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. Moses identifies both divine and human leadership that would guide Israel across the Jordan, emphasizing the continuity of the divine presence while establishing Joshua's authority as Moses' designated successor. God's divine leadership receives primary emphasis through the phrase, "He will cross over ahead of you," indicating that God functions as the military commander. God leads the conquest. He's not a distant supporter from the rear providing assistance. The Hebrew verb avar, which is translated to cross over, appears frequently in conquest narratives, establishing this crossing as divinely initiated and directed military campaign rather than merely human territorial expansion. The promise of divine military action, "He will destroy these nations before you," indicates complete victory rather than partial success. The language echoes previous divine promises about Canaanite destruction, while emphasizing divine agency rather than human military capability. Joshua's role receives secondary but crucial positioning. Joshua will also cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said, indicating that Joshua's role is complementary rather than competitive to the divine leadership. The phrase, "as the Lord said," references the previous designation of Joshua as Moses' successor back in Numbers 27, verses 18 to 23, providing a prophetic foundation for Joshua's authority. The historical precedent from Sihon and Og, verse 4, provides tangible evidence for divine military capability. The Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the king of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. These recent victories demonstrate divine power while encouraging confidence in similar future successes. "Just as he did" describes a direct parallel between the past divine action and what the Israelites can expect in the future. The theological principle establishes divine priority in conquest while validating human leadership through divine designation. Moses carefully balances the emphasis on divine agency with a recognition of Joshua's legitimate authority, avoiding both presumption that ignores human responsibility and anxiety that doubts divine commitment. Moses' identification of both divine and human leadership crossing before Israel demonstrates that effective succession requires balancing confidence in divine sovereignty with acceptance of human authority designated by God's divine choice. The last time Israel stood at the edge of the land, they refused to enter. How is Moses preparing them to do better this time? Well, Moses employs several strategic approaches to overcome Israel's previous failure at Kadesh Barnea, addressing the specific fears and doubts that had led to the 40-year wilderness punishment while building confidence for successful conquest under new leadership. His preparation strategy combines theological foundation with practical encouragement and historical precedent. First, Moses emphasizes divine initiative and presence rather than human military capability. His declaration that the Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you directly addresses the previous generation's fear about the enemy's strength by establishing God as the military commander rather than a distant supporter. The construction he is crossing over places divine action in emphatic position, countering doubt about God's commitment to Israel. Second, Moses provides concrete historical evidence through recent victories over Sihon and Og. The Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. These tangible demonstrations of divine power occurred within the current generation's memory, providing a verifiable foundation for their confidence rather than relying on the distant miracles from the Egyptian deliverance 40 years before. Third, Moses addresses leadership transition anxiety by establishing Joshua's divine appointment. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. The previous generation had questioned Moses' leadership during the spy crisis back in Numbers 14. So Moses carefully validates Joshua's authority through divine designation rather than human choice, preventing similar leadership challenges in the future. Fourth, Moses provides direct divine commands that emphasize offensive action rather than defensive paralysis. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. The Hebrew verb natan, which is translated will give, indicates that these victories are a divine gift rather than a human achievement, while the command to act prevents the previous generation's paralysis through their analysis and debate about the situation. Fifth, Moses directly commands courage and forbids fear. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. The phrases be strong and courageous and do not fear or be dismayed use imperative forms indicating moral obligation rather than emotional suggestion. Sixth, Moses concludes with fundamental theological assurance. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. The phrase, he will not let you go weak nor abandon you, is the way it's translated literally, and it directly addresses abandonment fears that had motivated the previous generation's rebellion. Moses' strategy for overcoming Israel's previous failure demonstrates that effective leadership preparation requires addressing specific fears through theological foundation, historical evidence, and direct divine promises rather than merely issuing commands or expressing optimism. So, what did God command Israel to do? In verses 5 and 6, Moses says to Israel, "The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." God commanded Israel to take decisive military action against the Canaanite nations while maintaining courage based on God's divine presence and promise. The commands combine specific tactical instructions with foundational spiritual principles, creating a comprehensive framework for a successful conquest that addresses both the practical and the psychological challenges. The primary tactical command appears in verse 5. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. The verb asa, which is translated to do or to act, requires active obedience to previously revealed instructions regarding how they were to treat the Canaanites, including complete destruction and a prohibition against intermarriage or making covenants with them. This was given to them back in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 6. The foundation for their action rests on the divine promise the Lord will give them over to you. The Hebrew to give is the word natan. It indicates divine gift rather than human achievement, establishing that the conquest of Canaan is a divine grant rather than a military accomplishment. This theological foundation prevents both presumption and discouragement by maintaining focus on divine agency. The courage commands address psychological prerequisites for successful action. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. The word be strong is the Hebrew word chazak. It emphasizes moral and spiritual fortitude, not just physical courage. The other word is ametz, which is be courageous. It indicates a resolute determination to act despite opposition. The negative commands forbid specific fear responses that had paralyzed the previous generation. The word yareh is translated fear, and aratz is be terrified or dismayed. These emotional responses had led to military inaction and covenant rebellion at Kadesh Barnea back in Numbers chapter 14, making their prohibition essential for a successful conquest of Canaan. The theological foundation for courage appears in the promise of divine presence. The Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. The one who goes with you indicates ongoing divine accompaniment, not just distant support. The divine commitment uses an emphatic negation. He will not let go is literally what it says, and he will not abandon. The idea of letting people go suggests divine support that prevents human failure, while the promise not to abandon them promises a permanent divine commitment regardless of the circumstances they find themselves in. God's commands to Israel demonstrate that successful spiritual warfare requires both active obedience to divine instructions and confident courage based on divine presence, combining practical action with theological foundation for effective victory. Joshua succeeds Moses as the national leader. What are his primary responsibilities? And what wisdoms or skills do you think he learned from watching Moses lead? Joshua's primary responsibilities as Moses' successor involve military leadership for conquest, territorial distribution, and spiritual guidance for maintaining Israel's relationship with God throughout the settlement period. Moses' commissioning of Joshua reveals the comprehensive nature of national leadership that extends beyond military command to include judicial, religious, and administrative functions. The military responsibility receives primary emphasis. Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The command emphasizes Joshua's personal responsibility for leading Israel into Canaan, as well as his role in distributing the territory among the tribes. Spiritual guidance involves maintaining Israel's relationship with God through law enforcement and ritual observance. Joshua's later speeches in Joshua 23 and 24 demonstrate his understanding that military success depends upon covenant faithfulness, making spiritual leadership inseparable from political and military responsibilities. The wisdom Joshua gained from observing Moses included several crucial leadership principles. First, Moses demonstrated that effective leadership requires constant dependence upon divine guidance rather than human wisdom alone. Joshua witnessed Moses' regular consultation with God at the tent of meeting. We saw that back in Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11. He learned that major decisions require God's divine direction. Second, Moses modeled patience with difficult people while maintaining a firm commitment to divine standards. Joshua observed Moses' consistent responses to Israel's complaints, their rebellions, and their failures, learning to balance pastoral care with administrative authority. The Hebrew concept of patience is literally long of nose. In other words, Moses' nose didn't get out of joint very easily. And that was his leadership style. In spite of personal frustration, he demonstrated that long of nose patience. Third, Moses demonstrated the importance of delegation and shared authority. He appointed judges back in Exodus 18, verse 21. He appointed elders in Numbers 11, verses 16 and 17. Joshua learned that effective leadership requires empowering others rather than concentrating all authority in his own position, enabling institutional sustainability beyond individual tenure. Fourth, Moses showed Joshua how to balance personal relationship with God and public responsibility to the people. Joshua witnessed Moses interceding for Israel during crises, learning that leaders must advocate for those they serve while maintaining accountable to divine standards. Fifth, Moses modeled transparent communication and educational leadership that explained divine requirements rather than merely issuing commands. Joshua observed Moses' teaching methodology throughout Deuteronomy, learning to provide theological foundation for the practical decisions and to connect daily leadership to covenant principles. Joshua's commissioning reveals that effective succession requires understanding that leadership involves military, administrative, and spiritual responsibilities that must be integrated rather than compartmentalized, with success depending upon divine guidance rather than human expertise alone. What did Moses promise Joshua? Moses promised Joshua God's divine presence and guidance that would ensure success in his leadership responsibilities, emphasizing the continuity of divine commitment that transcends human leadership transitions. He declared, the Lord himself. Literally, the Hebrew phrase is, the Lord, he is the one. It uses an emphatic construction, emphasizing divine priority and initiative in Joshua's coming leadership challenges. The promise of divine precedence. He goes before you. The Lord, he is the one who goes before you, establishes God as pathfinder and military commander rather than follower or supporter. The Hebrew participle, haholek, the one who goes, indicates ongoing action, not a single event, promising God's continuous divine leadership throughout conquest and settlement periods. But there's also the promise of God's divine presence. He goes before you, but he will also be with you, guaranteeing personal divine companionship during leadership challenges. This echoes the promise God gave to Moses at the burning bush back in Exodus 3, verse 12, and it reinforces the continuity of God's divine commitment across generations of leadership change. The expression with you indicates intimate proximity rather than distant support. The negative promises use emphatic Hebrew construction to guarantee divine faithfulness. He will not let you go weak nor abandon you, is what it literally says. The verb rapha, to let go or to weaken, suggests divine support that prevents human failure during overwhelming circumstances, while the word abandon, he will not forsake you or abandon you, is the word of azav. It promises permanent divine commitment regardless of human performance or circumstances. The emotional support commands address leadership anxieties. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. The Hebrew word gareh, to fear, encompasses anxiety about inadequacy, while the word chatat, to be dismayed or broken down, describes discouragement that leads to paralysis. Moses' commands address both immediate fear and long-term discouragement that would undermine Joshua's effectiveness. The theological significance lies in Moses' understanding that successful leadership transition requires confidence in divine continuity rather than human capability. His promises focus entirely on divine character and commitment rather than Joshua's qualifications or preparation, establishing foundation for leadership courage that depends on divine faithfulness. The historical precedent appears in Moses' own experience of divine presence throughout 40 years of wilderness leadership. His testimony carries authority because he personally experienced the divine faithfulness that he promises to Joshua, creating a credible foundation for confidence in continued divine support. The practical application involves understanding that leadership transitions benefit from explicit affirmation of divine commitment and clear commands regarding emotional responses to leadership challenges. Moses provides both theological foundation, the divine presence, and the practical guidance, the commands for courage, that are necessary for effective succession. There's a great song that was written and sung by a group called the Keith Lancaster Singers. I love this song, and it seems so appropriate now I want to share it with you.
Be strong and courageous and do not be afraid. The Lord goes with you each and every day. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. The Lord goes before you through the trouble and strife. And He will protect you all the days of your life. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. Be strong and courageous and do not be afraid. The Lord goes with you each and every day. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. Every day. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid. He'll never forsake you. Be courageous and do not be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Moses' promises to Joshua demonstrate that effective leadership succession requires confident affirmation of divine continuity and explicit commands regarding emotional responses to leadership challenges, creating foundation for courage based on divine character rather than human capability. Who carried the Ark of the Covenant? Well, the scripture says in Deuteronomy 31, verse 9, so Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the Levitical priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord and to all the elders of Israel. The Levitical priests carried the Ark of the Covenant. That's what the text says. Now, the designation Levitical priest combines priestly office with tribal identity, indicating that priestly functions were restricted to specific Levitical families. They were not open to all Israelites. This restriction reflects divine appointment through Aaron's line, according to Exodus 28, verse 1, and it ensures proper handling of the sacred objects by divinely authorized personnel. The verb to carry or bear indicates more than just transportation. It suggests the ceremonial bearing that maintains proper reverence for the ark's sacred character. This was an ongoing responsibility, not an occasional duty, making ark bearing a central aspect of the Levitical priestly identity and function. The designation, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, emphasizes its role as the symbol and container of covenant relationship rather than merely a religious piece of furniture. The ark contained the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, making it the physical repository of covenant law and tangible reminder of divine presence among Israel. The historical context reveals the ark's central role in Israel's religious and military life. During the wilderness wandering, the ark preceded Israel's march, according to Numbers 10, verses 33 to 36, symbolizing God's divine guidance and presence. In the conquest narratives, the ark's presence guaranteed divine support for military campaigns. Joshua 3, verses 3 and 4, Joshua 6, verses 6 and 7, making its proper handling essential for Israel's success. The liturgical significance involves the priest's role as mediators between the divine holiness of God and human sinfulness. Only divinely appointed personnel could approach the sacred objects without suffering divine judgment, making proper authorization essential for Israel's spiritual welfare and maintenance of the covenant. The administrative function appears in Moses' delivery of the written law to both the priests and the elders, indicating a shared responsibility for preservation and transmission of the covenant law. The priests maintained the physical custody of the legal documents, while the elders bore the responsibility for teaching and enforcing the law, creating a complementary leadership role to covenant administration. The theological principle establishes proper respect for divine holiness through authorized intermediaries who maintain covenant relationship between God and people. The restriction of bearing the ark to Levitical priests demonstrates that approach to divine presence requires divine appointment rather than human presumption or democratic selection. The Levitical priest's responsibility for carrying the ark demonstrates that maintaining covenant relationship requires divinely authorized intermediaries who ensure proper reverence for divine holiness while enabling ongoing divine presence among the people. What did Moses command the Israelites to do at the end of every 7 years? Moses commanded Israel to read the entire law publicly during the Festival of Tabernacles in every Sabbath year, creating a comprehensive educational program that ensured generational transmission of the covenant knowledge and renewed commitment to divine requirements. He instructed, at the end of every 7 years, in the year for canceling debts during the Festival of Tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, you shall read this law before them in their hearing. The specification of time, every 7 years, coordinates the legal reading with the Sabbath year cycle, connecting covenant renewal with economic restoration through cancellation of debts, which was to occur on the 7th year, according to Deuteronomy 15, verses 1 to 6. This timing demonstrates integration between spiritual, social, and economic aspects of covenant life, preventing the Israelites from compartmentalizing their religious obligations from their practical living. The context of the festival, during the Festival of Tabernacles, utilizes Israel's most joyful celebration for covenant education, associating divine law with thanksgiving and celebration rather than burden and restriction. The Feast of Tabernacles commemorated both harvest blessing and wilderness wandering, according to Leviticus 23, verses 39 to 43, making it the ideal context for renewing their covenant commitment. The geographical requirement is to take place at the place he will choose, centralizes the covenant education at the sanctuary, ensuring authoritative interpretation and preventing regional variations in legal understanding. All of Israel was to come together. All of Israel was to listen to the same law read. This centralization creates unity of legal interpretation while maintaining divine authority over covenant instruction. Moses identified this place in Deuteronomy 27 as the valley between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. After the conquest of the land, Joshua had the people assemble in the Nablus Valley between the mountains. The Nablus Valley is a natural amphitheater formed by Mount Gerizim to the south and Mount Ebal to the north. Nestled between the two mountains is a natural amphitheater where a crowd could hear the reading from both mountains. Half the priests stood on Mount Gerizim and read the blessings Israel would enjoy if they obeyed the law. The other half of the priests stood on Mount Ebal and read the curses Israel would experience if they disobeyed the law. And between these mountains lies the biblical city of Shechem. The picture here looks at the amphitheater from the east. But Moses said, assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the foreigners residing in your towns, so that they can listen and learn to fear the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of this law. Their children who do not know this law must hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. This comprehensive audience includes men, women, children, foreigners residing in your towns, demonstrating inclusive educational policy that transcends gender, age, and ethnic boundaries. The Hebrew construction emphasizes this is universal participation, not selective instruction, ensuring that covenant knowledge reaches all community members regardless of their social status. The educational purpose appears in the phrase, so they can listen and learn to fear the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of this law, in verse 12. The Hebrew verb shama is to listen, to hear. It indicates attentive reception, not just passive exposure. The word lamad, to learn, suggests internalization that produces behavioral change. In other words, they're to hear and apply. The generational concern emerges through specific provision for the children. Their children who do not know this law must hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you're crossing the Jordan to possess. The Hebrew phrase, who do not know, indicates that those who are lacking the knowledge of experience, not just the lacking of intellectual information. The theological foundation involves fear the Lord, which encompasses reverent respect, awe, and obedient submission to divine authority. This fear produces careful observance of covenant requirements rather than merely emotional response, creating a foundation for long-term covenant faithfulness. The practical implementation requires systematic planning for periodic covenant renewal that maintains spiritual vitality across generations. The 7-year cycle provides sufficient frequency to ensure that children reach maturity with exposure to comprehensive legal instruction, while allowing adequate time for practical application between these renewal events. Unfortunately for Israel, they didn't observe the sabbatical years. This is what is given as the reason for their exile in 2 Chronicles 36, verse 21. The land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All of the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Moses' command for septennial law reading demonstrates that maintaining covenant faithfulness requires systematic educational programs that combine celebration with instruction, ensuring that each generation receives comprehensive exposure to divine requirements in contexts that associate obedience with joy rather than burden. The land and the law are central to the life of Israel. How are they related to each other? The land and the law share an inseparable covenant relationship where land tenure depends upon legal obedience, while law observance requires land settlement for complete implementation. Moses' instructions reveal this interdependence through his emphasis that learning the law must continue as long as you live in the land you're crossing the Jordan to possess, establishing geographical and legal boundaries for covenant life. The land serves as a classroom for the implementation of the law, providing a physical context where abstract legal principles become practical applications, affecting agriculture, justice, worship, and social relationships. Many Mosaic laws require settled agricultural society rather than nomadic existence. Things like the Sabbath year observance in Deuteronomy 15, the procedures for tithes in Deuteronomy 14, the procedures for administering justice in Deuteronomy 16, all assume permanent communities with established institutions. The law provides the moral and spiritual framework for continued possession of the land, ensuring that Israel's presence reflects God's blessing rather than merely human conquest. The concept of inheritance emphasizes that the land is a divine gift, it's not a human achievement, creating an obligation to maintain covenant relationship that justifies their continued possession. The conditional nature of land tenure appears throughout Deuteronomy. Obedience ensures continued blessing and security, while disobedience results in exile and dispossession. Deuteronomy 28, verses 63 to 68, points this out. This theological framework makes law observance essential for retaining the land, and it prevents any separation between religious obligation and practical life. The generational dimension connects the law transmission with the land inheritance, as children who do not know this law must learn covenant requirements to maintain their family inheritance rights. The Hebrew phrase, all the days, emphasizes ongoing rather than temporary responsibility, making legal education a continuous requirement rather than a single event. The sanctuary centralization requirement demonstrates that land and law interact through geographical focus. The command to read the law at the place he will choose assumes territorial control that enables central sanctuary establishment and regular festival observance, requiring secure travel and agricultural stability. The theological principle establishes covenant life as an integration of spiritual commitment and physical existence, rather than a dualistic separation between sacred and secular spheres. Israel's distinctive identity emerges through demonstrating divine character in practical daily life within geographical boundaries that enable comprehensive implementation of the law. We need to understand and model spiritual commitment that affects all aspects of life and community engagement rather than being restricted to narrowly religious activities. The integration of faith and daily life requires community contexts that enable comprehensive discipleship rather than private belief systems that avoid practical application. The missional dimension appears through Israel's calling to demonstrate God's character to the surrounding nations through just social relationships, generous economic practices, and worship that reflects God's nature. The way they were supposed to blend the land and the law was supposed to provide a platform for covenant witness that would attract other nations to covenant relationship with Israel's God. The inseparable relationship between land and law in Israel's covenant life demonstrates that spiritual commitment requires comprehensive lifestyle integration rather than dualistic separation between sacred religious activity and secular daily existence. Well, that's our brief lesson on Deuteronomy 31, verses 1 to 13, as Israel's on the verge of the promised land and Moses passes the baton to Joshua. In our next lesson, we'll talk about Moses' death when God calls his servant home, Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 to 12. I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.